Hello everyone, Kevin Carrillo here, and welcome to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast. My guest today is Julia Jacobson, CEO of Aster Farms. Hello, Julia.
Hi, thank you for having me today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm looking forward to talking with you today. So first off, where are you based, Julia? I know you're in California, right?
I am in Oakland at the moment. This is where our headquarters is located, and our farm is up in Lake County.
Got you. Okay. And so for the listeners out there, we're talking with Julia Jacobson. She's the CEO of Aster Farms, which is a Northern California cannabis company founded in 2016 by your husband, I believe. So you're a married couple duo. Y'all focus on producing sustainably grown cannabis in Northern California.
That is correct.
Awesome. So I am excited to learn more about Aster Farms. But before we jump into that, I want to get to know a little bit about your background. So from what I've initially gathered, and it's pretty clear, you're an entrepreneur at heart.
Absolutely. And this probably won't be the last business.
See, I love that. I love that spirit. I like to think of myself as an entrepreneur as well. Obviously, you've had tons of success with your ventures, and that's what I want to talk to you about first. So tell me a little bit about your background and what was the first company that you founded?
Yeah, so I started my career as a buyer for Bloomingdale's right out of college, and I was there for about 3.5 years when I began seeing things in the supply industry that made me want to leave and start my own company to solve them. So that was the beginning of the entrepreneurial itch. And so I left to start my first startup. It was a tech startup that combined what is called affiliate marketing and, connecting. Yep.
And affiliate marketing, for those who don't know, it's basically like referrals to other businesses, and then you're getting a commission or some type of compensation for that referral, correct?
Exactly. So we basically built the Squarespace of affiliate marketing. And so I ran that company for about 5.5 years. We went through the Techstars Accelerator program, and I ultimately led the company through an acquisition to XO Group, which is a media group that owns The Knot and The Bump. So I went on to work there for a little over a year as the director of commerce and then the director of national revenue products.
Wow. So, being in the entrepreneur network here in Dallas, Techstars is huge, right? So that's basically like a program or an incubator that kind of helps companies either raise funding, capital, maybe even IPO and go public at some point, right? Don't they help with all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so they're basically like a boot camp. It's like getting your MBA plus actually running a company all in 3.5 months. So it's an intensive program where you're set up with mentors across all different industries who bring different skill sets to you. You go through courses, learning different, CEO skills, CTO, CFO skills, and then it culminates in a demo day, which many people have seen through TV shows and whatnot. And on demo day, you raise funds, and the Techstars community helps you get to that next milestone. For me, it was really a boot camp in being a CEO. I've learned so many things from just those 3.5 months that have really led to success in my career. And beyond that, the network that Techstars has is invaluable. One of my advisors and investors today was one of my Techstars mentors. So it's a very close-knit community that continues to be fruitful in my life.
Wow. And what's some of the criteria that programs like that look for? Is there a certain like revenue that you have to be making or certain milestones that you need to hit in your business before getting accepted?
It really depends. Techstars has both industry agnostic programs and also industry focused programs. So for example, they have an accelerator program with RGA that's really focused on creating actual consumer products. I went through one of the agnostic programs. So we had everything from a robot that brews beer for you at home to a tax solution. And so it really depends on what type of program you're in and really what type of industry and business you're running. For some, it makes sense to go into the accelerator when you're pre-revenue. And for other businesses and industries, it really makes sense for you to be farther along. So it's quite the mix. I think, what Techstars believes in is not just about your business model and the viability of what you're building, but also who the founders are.
Sure.
Because what they say is they're really investing in people, and they're investing in you as founders, not just for the company that you're building today, but for your entrepreneurial career going forward.
Yeah, I think that mindset is spot on. I just had Rena Sherbril on in the last episode. She's the host of the Cannabis Investing podcast. And, anytime we're talking about companies, when it comes to the stock market and how well they're performing, it always kind of leads back to who's leading the company, who's in charge, right? And how high are their skills when it comes to management and running a company? And so I think that that's so true. And you're right. These investors, they really looked for the person, not necessarily the business, right? Because if that business isn't successful, they're investing that person to maybe come up with another idea or run another business that they may have in their portfolio.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're on the same page there. So that's awesome. Okay. So you go through the Techstars program, and your company was called, is it NMRKT?
Yes, pronounced in market.
In
So
market.
it was the conception was it's the convergence of when you're a buyer in retail, you are literally in the market when you're out purchasing for 8 months, what's going to drop in stores 8 months in the future. And consumers are also in the market for things. And I was trying to connect those dots a little closer. So yes.
I love it. It's great. So how long? So you went within that program, and then did you immediately get acquired, or was there a couple years after when that happened?
No, we ran the company for about 2 more years after that. And that was when we started to get some acquisition inbound conversations, which was very exciting and quickly just turns into a whole huge distraction and a world of its own. So I'm glad that I went through my first experience with an acquisition with that last company, because it's really hard to prepare for what the experience is actually like.
Well, and then you mentioned earlier, and this won't be the last company that you're running. You're thinking about even launching another one after Aster Farms. So, when you were running in market or even launching it, did you have the plan, the exit strategy plan already in mind, or did that just come later?
We absolutely built the company with an exit strategy, with an acquisition as our exit strategy. We definitely knew some acquirers that we were targeting, but we weren't building the product for those acquirers. We were building it for our consumers and our clients and what we really thought the problem was in the market, which I think is the right way to build for success and build for an acquisition. In terms of being a repeat entrepreneur, I think I'm going to be in cannabis for the rest of my career. It is just, I'm curious and I'm a passionate learner, and there is not a better field that I have found to, really utilize those two passions. And so I think that, I'm learning every day, and it's fascinating and it's inspiring and invigorating. And it's just, for all the roller coaster and challenges that there are to running a cannabis company, this industry has just completely captivated me. And so, we love Astro Farms. We want to run this company as long as we possibly can, and we want this company to live on far beyond us. But I imagine that I will have another company at some point in the future.
It's that entrepreneur itch. You can't help it. I totally get it. So let's talk about that pivot. So you get acquired, or you sell in market, and so what made you really want to get into cannabis? I mean, were you a user and an advocate before? Was this something that was new to you and you were just interested in? Walk us through that.
Yeah, so I had been a recreational user for probably a decade at that point, maybe more, but really just recreational. I mean, I used cannabis. Yeah,
Did people know that you were a recreational user, or did you kind of hide in the cannabis closet as they?
absolutely hid in the cannabis closet. I mean, all of my friends knew. I was completely open to my friends, my family, my mom knew. In fact, my mom once called me up and said, I just want to make sure that the cannabis that you're consuming is organic. Could you ask your dealer? And and it actually blew my mind, because to me, I was like, well, it's a plant grown, by people, farming, who've cared about this for decades. Of course it's organic. And then you look into it, and the industry before it was legalized is quite the opposite. It is one of the most toxic, pesticide riddled in agricultural industries out there. And I remember when she said that, it really blew my mind. And I actually did ask my dealer, and they were like, well, yeah, maybe. I don't know if there are pesticides, but yeah, it's probably organic. So,
The next batch, they come and say, hey, this one's the organic one, so we're going to upcharge you by 20-30 bucks, right? Or something like
right, exactly. So yeah, I was out of the closet with friends and family, but certainly not comfortable sharing it on a professional level. I'm super type A, and I think a lot of some of my excessive motivation and work ethic might have even come from trying to overcome the taboo and stigma that I felt myself in being a quote unquote stoner. So I was definitely in the cannabis closet when it came to a more professional level.
Yeah.
Over time, my mom has migraines, chronic migraines. They're hereditary, and they started to develop and got worse and worse over the course of my 20s and into my early 30s. And it got to a certain point where it was debilitating my life. I was missing work. I was missing my social life. I was in the hospital all the time. I had an 8-month-long single migraine for 8 months straight,
Oh my
pain completely 100% of the time for 8 months. Was
Well,
in the hospital 3 times, was having lidocaine shots in my head. Anything that anybody said, like, get a shot in your head, it might help, I went out and got the shot in my head.
yeah, I mean, having a constant headache, I can't imagine for 8 months. Like at that point, you're trying anything that people are saying, right? Like just
Anything. I was going crazy. I had to wear these rose-colored aviator glasses every day to work, because the fluorescent lights would affect my migraines. I mean, it was ridiculous. And I was on a cocktail of pharmaceutical medications that were giving me crazy side effects, particularly when it comes to chronic migraines. They're only until this last year there hasn't been a migraine medication on there. So they prescribe you antidepressants, high blood pressure medications, and epilepsy medications. And a lot of the time, it's really, they're just throwing darts at the wall.
it's a medicine cocktail. It sounds like, hey, let's just try all these different things and see what happens, right?
And those are no joke medications like that. Those are some serious medications that have known side effects. And so it was really challenging. And one of the times that I was in the ER doctor said to me, this is New York. We didn't have this conversation. I can't prescribe you anything, but you should try, if you are comfortable with cannabis and you have access to it, you should try cannabis for your migraines. And I did. And it completely changed my relationship with cannabis. It is now part of my normal routine. It's part of my wellness and just being able to function on a daily basis. I'm completely off of my pharmaceutical medications. I haven't been in the hospital in over 3 years. And so it really changed my life. And that was the moment where it went from just, I'm a little bit of a stoner, after work, smoking a joint, to I need to know more about this. I need to find other ways to consume it. It is an important piece of my life.
And are you seeing like day and night effects in terms of like when you feel a migraine coming on, and if you smoke, does it immediately go away, or because you smoke so frequently and so regularly, they just don't come at all?
It's a combination. So I do prophylactic, and I also have my routine for when I'm hit with a migraine. So when I'm actually hit with a really bad migraine, one of the best things is falling asleep. When I fall asleep for at least 20 minutes, it resets something in my brain, and my migraine typically goes away. But I am very high energy, and it is hard to put me asleep in the middle of the day just because I have a migraine. So when that's the case, I typically choose a really high THC indica strain that helps me go to sleep. If I can knock myself out and then wake up, it typically resets. I also choose strains that have high CBG. Some migraines are, you need to constrict the blood vessels, and some of them you actually need to release them. For me, when I have a lot of migraine pain around my eyes, CBG helps relieve that pressure. So I have a white buffalo strain that I hoard. I have a whole migraine stash of it in my closet. But then prophylactically, I am consuming a small amount of THC at all times, and that I truly believe has helped keep away the migraines. I think, part of it is just kind of alleviating some of my anxiety and stress, anxiety has been a challenge for me my entire life. I think that definitely plays into encouraging my migraines to kick in. So it's a combination, and it's something that I'm still working on. We've had wildfires here in California. The air quality's been bad, and I've been having more migraines. And so there are environmental reasons also, and I have to figure out, okay, just because I have a little bit of a migraine now, I can't go knock myself out for an hour. So I'm continually learning and adjusting, but it is a comprehensive package.
Wow. And it's funny you say that the high THC strains tend to help you more, because I noticed your website with your products, and there's a few that are, I mean, in the high 20s, 26%, 27%. I was like, wow, this is seems like it's good stuff that you guys are growing out there in Aster Farms. So
It is. And it's not all about potency. And that's something that we really try to educate on at Aster Farms. Our number one selling core strain, which are proprietary genetics, is our Maui OG. It comes in at 14.5% THC every single year. And it is one of our best sellers. Some of the most OG bud buyers will only buy it. And it's one of my favorite strains. It's functional. You really feel your body in a new way. It's radiant. And so, we have our 26% THC. We also have our hash infused, which get upwards of 30, but our 14.5 is one of our best sellers. So, it's more than potency.
sure, absolutely, yeah. Especially with all the secondary compounds that are in it, like the terpenes, the flavonoids, right? That can really bring that flower to life outside of just its potency. So I totally hear you. What's the white buffalo strain? So it's a combination of THC and CBG, you said?
It's a strain that just happens to have a pretty high amount of CBG in it. And CBG has been used for glaucoma. It really helps with ocular pressure. And so I have personally found that it helps with migraines.
Yeah, I've even read some studies. They said that CBG can even help reduce some cancer cells in
Interesting.
a body. Again, I mean, we're still learning about all this stuff, but the fact that there's over 150 cannabinoids found in the plant, and we're only scratching the surface with like 8 to 10 that we've identified, or even in use, is we've got a long way to go, basically.
Yep.
So let's go back to your
Yes.
path, right? So you've been acquired. You've understood that THC really helps with your migraines and for certain health issues that you were facing previously. When did you decide, okay, I want to found Aster Farms, and I want to get into the cultivation side of it?
So simultaneously, I had become incredibly burnt out. I didn't want to have anything to do with the technology sector anymore. I didn't want to be running a tech startup. I didn't want to be in traditional retail. And I had this bizarre urge to literally put my hands in the dirt. And so for me, it was figuring out, how do I transition my career into something that I can be in nature and literally get in touch, be in agriculture. I spent one night up until 4 in the morning looking up soil testing devices. I almost applied for a BD role at a company where one of the requirements in the job description was you have to be able to carry a 50 pounds by yourself and 100 pounds with someone else, I think. And it was just fascinating to start to see, what is it going to mean for me to be in a position where I can put my hands in the dirt. And so between cannabis taking on a whole new, meaning in my life, and feeling like I had to get back to the earth in some bizarre way, it started to kind of all come together. And simultaneously, my husband, his family, his grandparents they moved to Mendocino in about 50 years ago and have been growing cannabis on an off the grid sustainable ranch for the last 50 years. So it has been a big part of the family, and at the same time not something that we knew that much about. And so when all of these things started to kind of converge, we kind of dug in deeper to the family history, understanding what it was all about. How does the family grow? While we are a husband and wife co-founding team, we do not grow on the family property. We are keeping business and family separate in that sense. But those three things kind of came together, and it just, all the arrows were pointing in the same direction. So we moved from New York to California and started Aster Farms.
Wow. I'm interested to learn about what strains you have on that private grow up for the family operation, as opposed to what Aster has, because I'm sure that there's even good stuff there also.
Well, so the legend has it, and anybody can counter us on this. I welcome it. Legend has it that Sam's family and the other farmers on Signal Ridge brought indica to California.
Wow.
Which is crazy. So we're still digging into that. We're trying to do some interviews up on Signal Ridge to see what more we can find. But yeah, we're talking to the family about some of the OG genetics, and unfortunately, there is no way to get them into the legal system at this point. But
And indica derived, I mean, from India, right? So that's where it got its name, indica. Is that correct?
yeah, there are, yes. Was it actually originated from India? I don't know, but yes, that is where the original name came from.
Sure. Yeah. So that is so cool that it was already kind of imprinted in your family history, right? That this is kind of something that you naturally would just kind of gravitate to with your husband. When you did make that pivot and decide, okay, this is what we want to do, did you get any feedback from the tech community? I mean, you're obviously a successful entrepreneur. You hadn't been out of the cannabis closet. So what type of feedback did you get from industry peers?
The feedback was very positive. Once you open up, you realize that everybody smokes weed. Everybody consumes cannabis. And that's something,
Right? Or they don't care. They're like, oh,
they don't care. Exactly. Or they're excited for you and fascinated by it, and they want to be on your newsletter. And so, it was a pretty easy transition. In fact, again, I remember my mom saying, if the two of you are going to do this, she was like, everything is moving quickly. You need to do this now if you're going to do it. And so, there was, although she has known for a long time and she has always been encouraging, as I told before, but the tech community was very supportive. Like I said, there are multiple people from my Techstars network who are investors and advisors in our company. And, we're starting to see those two worlds meld a lot more, not only through some of the ancillary services, through actual like cannabis software services, but also in terms of VCs and tech people starting to invest in the cannabis space where they wouldn't have normally.
that makes a lot of sense. I guess I was asking at first because I've talked to a lot of I've had guests on where they've come from like the corporate environment, or they've come from like the financial side where they were covering other things outside of cannabis. And when they decide, I mean, the corporate environment's very different as opposed to like the entrepreneur tech startup world, right? I mean, people are pretty open and understanding, and especially with the potential that cannabis presents from a economic impact and health standpoint. Any entrepreneur would say, okay, that makes sense. That's a natural transition, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about Aster Farms. So you launched it. So really, to tell us more about your company and what the company's mission is in terms of sustainability and organic growing.
Yeah. So, for Sam and I, we are conscious consumers. We care about the ingredients, what we're putting, the food that we're putting in our body, where it comes from. We care about where the clothes are produced that we, put on our backs. We care where we spend our money. At the same time, we're not hippie, and we live an urban lifestyle. And so we didn't see a brand on the market that really resonated with us in that way, that was healthy but not hippie. And so we wanted to create this brand for conscious consumers, who might resonate with that, in a different way. And
Mhm.
we always say, think of Mrs. Meyer's cleaning products. You see them in all types of households, and the common theme and ethos there is good ingredients, healthy, but it's still a beautiful product that appeals to a mainstream. And so that's what we set out to create.
So let's talk a little more about that. So like, how do your practices when it comes to organic farming or sustainability differ from other farms?
Yeah, so there's a big difference in terms of outdoor cultivation and other ways of growing. Indoor cultivation, and this statistic is back from I think 2015, so who knows what it is today. Indoor cultivation accounted for 1% of all electricity use in the United States.
Wow.
Insane. And so obviously there have been advancements. People are using LED light technology, but it's still a really resource draining, high carbon footprint, and just environmentally not necessarily sound industry for the most part. And so when you're talking about the outdoor cultivation world, for the most part, if you're certainly if you're licensed and legal in California due to the regulations, the environmental regulations that we're held to, you're already probably growing in a pretty sustainable, pretty organic way.
What are those regulations? Sorry to cut you up, but what are those regulations? I mean, I'm live in Texas where, we're not even a medical state. So how is California different in that way?
So California has something called CEQA, which is the California Environmental Quality Act. And it is the regulatory body and regulatory text that basically dictates a lot of how cannabis cultivation and other cannabis operations can be zoned in various neighborhoods and counties, and how we actually operate. So it's everything from, for example, our composting pesticide green waste has to be over 250 feet from the closest stream or water body. We cannot have our operations on a certain grade slope because there could be runoff. There's a very, very regulated list of, or even not even chemical pesticides, but organic pesticides that we're allowed to use. And we really believe that these strict regulations are for the best for everyone, for consumers, for the environment, for the industry, for the neighbors of cannabis farms. The cannabis industry has been incredibly environmentally harmful in its illegal days in California, particularly, with people just dumping garbage and pesticides in national forests and in these guerrilla grows. So it's strenuous, and it unfortunately means that people who have maybe been growing for 50 years and own their property are just literally not zoned in,
Mhm.
because a stream runs in the wrong direction on their property, or the grade of their slope is just 1 degree too high. And so when people talk about how many cannabis farmers there are in California and how much supply there must be, what they have to realize is a small fraction. There are about 68,000 originally cannabis farmers in California. Less than 5,000 licenses exist.
Wow.
And those licenses are held by a small pool, Like we have 2 licenses today and we'll have about 15 by next year. So those are held by a small pool of people. And so, it's a very different ballpark.
So okay, so go ahead and continue. You were talking about the outdoor grow and how it seems to be more sustainable and eco-friendly as opposed to an indoor grow operation due to the high and draining electricity that's needed, right?
Exactly. And flushing water and flushing soil. When we're using water, some of it is going back into the water table. We're putting it right into the ground, as opposed to into a system that's been being filtrated out into our public waterways. And one of the big differentiators between us and other outdoor growers in terms of kind of taking it to the next level, we grow right in ground in live soil. A lot of outdoor cultivators grow in pots above ground. And there are many things that make it more eco-friendly and also desirable as a finished product to be growing in ground in live soil. We have created an ecosystem of insects and microbes and, plant life and creatures, literally between like the frogs and the dragonflies and the snakes on our farm. They are creating an ecosystem that's keeping pests away from us. It is, maintaining the quality of the soil. We use cover crop. We don't have barren sites, so we are not contributing to runoff. We're not contributing to dust and contaminating air quality. So by growing with the roots in the ground and with cover crop and grass on the ground and an ecosystem of these creatures, you are actually doing better for the earth. We are capturing an incredible amount of carbon. Cannabis plants, hemp plants are known for capturing carbon really well. And other things. Hemp was actually used to clean up Chernobyl, which is an interesting fact that a lot of people don't know.
I did not know that. Wow, that is very interesting.
Yeah, the agricultural fields around Chernobyl, they used hemp to clean them up because it sucks carbon out of the air and it sucks a lot of properties out of the ground.
Well, I saw an episode of Planet Earth, and I think they were covering Chernobyl, and they didn't mention that. But I did. One thing that did fascinate me was that how quickly wildlife is returning to that area. So, to your point of hemp being grown or cannabis being grown, that may be a huge factor in accelerating that process.
Perhaps, yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
So yeah, and so in terms of growing in ground, we're also creating a much deeper terpene profile. If you look at now that there's state license testing happening, you can look at test results across an indoor and outdoor and in live soil and in pot. You can look at test results across all these different grow methods. And what we have seen is that by growing in ground in live soil, you get an incredibly rich terpene profile. Your cannabinoid profile is richer. The scent and flavor profile are more enhanced. And that is why we believe a Maui OG at 14.5% has an incredible effect that people are like just chasing in California, whereas, an indoor that hits 29% could just be a flat high.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. The how we talked about it earlier, how the secondary compounds or that entourage effect really is a better experience than just that flat high, right? Where it's kind of just an isolated experience.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, when you're talking about like how hemp is good for the environment and it helps kind of clean out the soil. I've had a guest on in the past, Sarah Yetman, who talked about like for just traditional farmers growing any type of produce or crop, right? She would say if you're wanting to grow organic, grow hemp first because it's going to say or do exactly what you're saying in terms of cleaning up that soil. So, I mean, is that valid? I mean, is that kind of the same example that you're giving when you're talking about how y'all are growing sustainably for THC?
So, fortunately or unfortunately, I will say fortunately because I care about consumers and my own health. Cannabis is held to completely different standards than hemp. Our testing regulations are in parts per billion, whereas your typical FDA testing is held to parts per million. So an example of this that I like to give is there was a edibles brand in California that makes chocolates that are very well known. And at the beginning of when testing was first regulated and mandatory, their chocolates kept failing, and they could not figure out why, because they use all organic ingredients. And they separated each ingredient and tested it through the cannabis testing labs, and the organic sugar would not pass. So cannabis is held to pesticide, chemical, myotoxin, just heavy metals. We are held to standards that are completely different than any other product that you ingest. And part of that is because cannabis can be inhaled. And so, you have to look at these compounds exponentially. But part of it is because this is the first time that we have an industry that is starting from scratch, and we can set the rules right. And so I believe that these testing standards are set in the correct place, but hemp does not have these same standards. So you cannot grow cannabis in contaminated soil and actually put it on the legal market in California. Because cannabis and hemp plants suck up so much of what is in the soil, you will pick up arsenic, you will pick up lead, you will pick up pesticides, you will pick up any chemicals. We know farmers who have owned their property and grown organic for years on the illegal market, and the moment testing came around, they found out that pesticide that the person who owned their property before them that they had in like another part of the property had actually drifted and seeped into the soil, and their crop, at least that area of their property, is completely unusable. So whereas hemp can be used for that, and there aren't any regulations to hold the actual levels of those toxins accountable, cannabis is absolutely held to those regulations.
So, like, when we think about hemp and how you can extract for like cannabinoids such as CBD or CBG, right? You're saying that those regulations in those, like, because federally it's legal to grow hemp, right, and extract for those cannabinoids, and it has to stay under that threshold of 0.3 or less THC. So you're saying that states that are not adult use for THC have different regulations and standards that are different than THC testing. And I guess I'm trying to get to, like, every grower in Texas, for example, who has a license to grow hemp, they are required to send their sample to a testing lab to make sure that all the microbials, all the, the THC potency level is down. So that test that I just explained, is that different than what the THC adult use states look like? And how are they different? Is one more stringent than the other?
Yes. So in California, all it takes to get a hemp license is $500 with the ag department. There really aren't many regulations that are different from traditional agriculture. Cannabis is held to completely different standards than traditional agriculture. And I can only speak to the California market, but the testing that is required for cannabis, the pesticide levels, all of the chemical levels are significantly higher and more stringent than in hemp.
Got you. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's obviously because we're just kind of learning about these other cannabinoids, and regulation and policies haven't really caught up to all that yet. It's moving so fast, right?
Yeah, and this is one of the things that really concerns us about the CBD market. It has taken off because it was legalized federally, and at least back in New York a couple years ago, you'd walk down the street and it's like, have CBD with your yoga, however you do that. Like, have CBD in your matcha, have CBD in your craft beer, have CBD for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Totally unregulated. You don't know where it's from. It's being sourced all around the country on these mass scale operations. So it has been very concerning to us to watch how hemp has gone through the legalization process compared to cannabis, specifically on a health and safety level. And you're seeing in states like New York, they've pulled that back. You cannot put hemp in anything without the legal claims have all been clawed back. The places that you can actually distribute have all been clawed back. And I think we're going to see this across the country on a much larger scale, is actual regulation of hemp and pulling back from kind of the free for all that has happened.
Mm. Yeah, it's an interesting market, and I totally see your frustration and the pain point that comes with the over marketing of CBD, right? I think that we've kind of moved so fast in that space that we haven't even had a true clear understanding of what health benefits the cannabinoid actually offers. Because we're talking about putting it in an energy drink, and we're putting like you said, CBD in yoga, whatever that means. So I would like to see us have a better understanding of what these cannabinoids actually do to complement our endocannabinoid system and those receptors, so that we can better understand what strains and what genetics we need to focus on for which outcome, right?
Absolutely. Totally agree. And in order to do that, we need to legalize THC as well, so that the research can be properly done. And, again, like I said, these regulations in California, they're here for a reason. All of the data and information that the regulatory agencies are getting are allowing them to help make better decisions in moving this industry forward for consumers and for operators. And instead of, I would rather walk before we run than go out there with all these SOPs and have to claw them back.
Right, which looks like that's the path we're kind of heading right now. I mean, I've heard of rumblings of the DEA talking about even lowering the potency threshold from zero point 0.3 to like 0.1, which is virtually almost impossible to grow a cannabis plant that has virtually no THC in it, because
Exactly.
it's part of the plant. It helps protect itself from UV sun ray lights and all that kind of stuff. So, go ahead.
Yeah, back in the past, there wasn't CBD and THC.
Right. It was one plant.
Every plant had both of them. We have bred over the last, however many decades and hundreds of years, we have bred the plants. We have bred CBD out of the THC cannabis, and we have bred THC out of the hemp cannabis.
Right. And that I had a guest on, Louis Lujan. He works in government relations. He has experience with the state, federal, and local levels. And, we talked about that frustration of how not only is the education and information not there, the peer review studies, just because of the scheduling, the Schedule 1 factor of THC, but the complexity that's been added to it now, because we're having to categorize these plants in 3 different ways. You have cannabis, right? You have hemp, which you could talk about from an industrial standpoint for material goods, and then you have marijuana, which is a government term talking about the criminalization of the cannabis plant. So it's very confusing, I would say.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tell me more, Julia. So on outside of the business, the day to day, I know that you're a big advocate when it comes to some social issues, especially working with success factors. You're an advocate of supporting certain social movements, as well as mentoring women within the industry. So tell us more about what you're doing there.
So I think a lot of this came from, honestly, my experience with Techstars. Having mentors was a game changer to my ability to succeed. I went from just shooting in the dark and trying to figure it all out on my own to having people who could guide me through the process. And me having that fortunate opportunity was definitely not lost on me. And so it has been very important to me, since having gone through Techstars, to be as involved as I can be as a mentor myself. So we work really closely with Success Centers in San Francisco. They are an organization that works to help people get opportunities and get jobs and gain skill sets, who are trying to get into cannabis, and also specifically for people who have been incarcerated for cannabis crimes and are trying to now turn that into a positive career situation. And so we do both workshops with success centers. So we teach workshops on white labeling and branding, and then we also donate to them. So we're huge fans of what they do. They are really making a difference in the community. We also recruit through them as well. And beyond that, I mentor both through the female entrepreneurial network. So Females to the Front is a really great group put on by the Initiative, which is an incubator. It's one of the few cannabis incubators out there. We love them.
Nice.
And starting next month, we will be mentoring Our Academy, which is an incredible program launched by the Our Dream crew. And essentially, it's a 13-week incubator program for equity applicants in cannabis in California. And along with the team at Old Pal and Herbal, Miss Grass, tons of fantastic brands are involved in this program, and we really hope that it's going to be really turn the dial, because the equity programs in California have not rolled out the way that at least we wish they were intended to be rolled out, and there's a lot of work to do to rectify the wrongs.
Mm-hmm. It's so good that you're actively a part and giving back, in that way, just because of the mentors that you've had coming up and the success that you've seen, paying it forward, So why don't you tell us, like, if there was an entrepreneur right now that really wanted to enter the cannabis space, what advice would you have to that individual in terms of, business advice and what things that they should look out for in terms of challenges and opportunities?
I would say that the one most important thing to think about if you're interested in getting into this space is to really hone in on what your skills are in whatever industry you're in now, because cannabis needs marketing people. Cannabis needs accountants. We need all of those normal functions. And so don't try to reinvent yourself. If you're not a cultivator, don't try to go out and cultivate. I don't actually cultivate. We have a professional team that we work with who works for Aster Farms. And so, figure out what you are best at and what you can bring to the cannabis industry as opposed to reinventing yourself. I would also say that you have to be super realistic about timeline. In California, it takes between local authorization and state authorization anywhere from 6 months to 12 months to get a license. And if you're talking about the cultivation side of things, you then have to take the agricultural cycle and seasons into account. So just because you got your LLC set up and you have your business partners and you have a little funding to go forward, it is a long road ahead. So just to be super realistic about the timing and to not be frustrated with that, because it takes a long time to get things up and running in a regulated market like this.
Right. And really in any market, right? Starting a new business, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes consistency, hard work, and having the right team in place, as you said, right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So I have one more question for you, Julia. You're an entrepreneur. You're successful. We see that you're always kind of thinking of the next thing or what challenge or problem you can solve. So what are your thoughts on the opportunity as it relates to the industrial hemp market? We kind of touched on the hemp bill being passed in 2018. It's legal nationwide to cultivate hemp. So do you see yourself maybe getting into that space at any point?
We are not going to get into the hemp space for a couple reasons. One, navigating THC and just really nailing that is a full-time job in and of itself. The other reason is that hemp and cannabis have to be grown on different scales. Industrial hemp, or even just hemp at all, because you're extracting it, it's the biomass and extraction from that, you're talking about a really large scale to get a much smaller end result. So cannabis farms, you're talking about maybe an acre, a couple acres. Hemp farms, you're talking 100+ acres. And in cannabis, hemp and THC cannabis plants, you have male plants and you have female plants. And what you are consuming, the bud, the flower in THC cannabis, is the female flower, and it's unpollinated. All it takes is one male plant to burst its pollen, And that can spread. Some people say 7 miles. I've heard up to 30 miles, which is insane. That pollen spreads, and if it fertilizes your flower, your female plants, your entire crop is ruined. And so with hemp, you don't have to worry about that as much. If you're creating hemp for seed production, then you want that pollination to happen.
Mhm.
If you're creating hemp for industrial fabric, you don't care about the pollination. If you're creating hemp for CBD, you do care to some extent about the pollination. But when you're talking about 100 acres of plants, the attention to detail and the ability to shut down a male plant before it is able to pollinate is a whole different level. It's really, really difficult. And so for a THC cannabis farmer, we are constantly in fear of hemp farms being anywhere within 7 miles of us. So the last thing that we would ever do is actually bring hemp onto our own property, because the scale at which we would have to grow would open us up to risk for pollination.
Wow. I mean, you're exactly right. I never thought of it in that situation that way. Again, because I'm located here in Texas, where adult use for THC is not prevalent. But I could see why that's a major concern. Um, especially as more hemp farms are starting to pop up here in Texas. Due to the federal farm bill. But that is a valid concern. Yeah, I didn't think about that.
It is the number one concern in most of the grower organizations in California, the THC grower organizations. It's something that we've been working on a local level with our county regulators to really try to just give context, so that as they are continuing to evolve the regulations and the zoning between the two categories, that can be taken into consideration, because the tax revenue that cannabis is bringing in is exponential. Like I said, $500 to the ag department, you can have a hemp license. Cannabis, just in our county alone, the handful of farms there, we've generated over $1.4 million in taxes in a single year.
Mm-hmm.
So it is definitely something that the local regulators need to understand the agricultural context of, and take into consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there needs to be a balance on both sides for both sides to be successful, right? And zoning laws are going to be key, because it'll be a detriment to the other side if those crops are too close due to pollination. So hopefully they can figure that out. Yeah. When are they deciding on that, or when does that come to a head? Do you know?
Well, it is a constant battle. In Lake County, where our farm is, hemp has already just been a free-for-all. And like I said, in many places, states and counties alike, there's beginning to be a crawlback, or clawback. And so we're starting to see that a little bit. And part of that is our organization lobbying with the county and just giving context. We want to live simultaneously with hemp. We don't want to ban hemp from the county. We just want to make sure that regulations are in place for it to be done responsibly, so that it's not harming other people's crops. Because the same is not true for cannabis pollinating hemp, because like I said, if it gets seeded, it isn't the end of the world. So it really is a one-way street in terms of the damage and risk.
Sure. No, that's very valid, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something that we'll be talking about more, and making sure that, or following that, and making sure that happens, because it's crucial to the industry, the THC industry. So, well, Julia, I really appreciate your time. You're super smart. You've been very insightful. Is there anything you want to leave the audience with before we hang up?
I think, just educate yourself. A lot of people feel very intimidated going into dispensaries, and I get it. And really, knowledge is power. And the more you learn about cannabis and the more you take the time to slowly experiment yourself so that you understand what works for you and what doesn't, the more power you hold walking into that dispensary and figuring out what's right for you. So definitely just say, knowledge is power, and to continue to get that information.
Well said. Well, thank you so much again for your time and for all the information. It's been really helpful and insightful, and I know that our audience is going to enjoy it. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a really great conversation.
And thank you all for listening. We'll talk to you next time. Bye.